Okay. So, we are a little bit behind. That's partly my fault. Actually, it's entirely my fault. I decided to show those films last class instead of this class. As you see, for today's the, bless you, today's the 11th. No, that was right. That was the time to show those classes. So, yeah, I'm just behind. That's all there is to it. I was trying to figure out why that is. So, I do want to talk a little bit about where we left off last time with respect to religious experience. And then we'll look today at, here's my goal. I want to get through Marx and Freud and the Hick reading today. If I don't, that's totally okay. That's totally fine. That's the goal for today, to catch up. If we don't catch up for today, that's fine, because the Hick reading and the Diller reading actually go together quite nicely. I'll at the very least be introducing John Hick today in his philosophy. He jumps into Kant, which confuses things, so I will have to say a little bit about Kant, which will take up a little bit of time. Immanuel Kant, that is. And he uses Kant in an interesting way to clarify his worldview, which is a weird thing to do on the face of it. If something needs to be clarified, then it's typically a good idea to clarify it with other things that are more clear, not less clear. Does anyone have any towels or anything with them? That's, this carpet, it's designed to take hits like this because it's awful to begin with. So it's a totally new, don't feel bad that it's totally new carpet. I'm serious. It's designed for this because it's frankly
already gone.
I don't even notice it's there. It's fine. Don't worry about that. That's all right. Did I even feel worse when I say that? Okay, so last time we were looking at those, we showed some videos of people who had, or an individual who had a religious experience, and then a woman who had spoke in terms of religious experiences, but it was purely a stroke. And she talks about it using language of, in particular, Buddhism, spiritual language, enlightenment, nirvana, and so forth. And if we were looking at a cause of that, the underlying cause of that experience, it seems like we could simply appeal to science. And this is something that Karl Marx was fond of, appealing to science. In fact, he wanted to get a scientific worldview of societies. He wanted to be at the very least, Engels, in his eulogy to Marx, said that Marx wanted to be a kind of Darwinian with respect to explaining social activities. The way that Darwin was able to naturalize and explain scientifically the biological evolutionary, Marx wanted to give a kind of scientific account of the human interactions, what we might call today sociological. Marx, by the way, predominantly interested in economics. He wrote his dissertation on ancient Greek philosophy, so he was a philosopher, but he preferred to be called an economist. He didn't want to be seen as merely abstractly theorizing at the level of philosophical analysis, distanced from reality. He was very much influenced by an extraordinarily abstract thinker, namely Hegel, Georg Wilhelm Gottfried Hegel, or not Gottfried, it's Georg Wilhelm, who is a very abstract philosopher. Marx takes a lot of concepts and ideas from Hegel and then expands upon them or uses them as a means of, I don't want to say critiquing religion, because that's not quite what he's doing. It sounds like he's critiquing religion. Freud, as we'll see, definitely critiques religion. Marx, what is Marx critiquing predominantly? What's he about? What's the deal with Karl Marx?
And how it's manipulated as this. Well, he says it's like the really upper class is able to, the priestly caste has used it as a means to kind of continually support this obviously flawed system, but in a way it gives it this divine redemption that, oh no, it's all God's plan, keep working your tail off for the pennies you're getting, because, one day things will be better in the next life.
And
That's one perspective. That's like the higher end, and then the lower end of like working class people, it's a crutch. It's a means of dealing with really unfortunate and uncomfortable circumstances.
And it's that second one that I think gets misconstrued, because we take that quote, Marx said religion is just an opiate, it's a drug, and that's all it is. But when you look at what Marx is saying about that, the opium, what is opium for? Pain. You use drugs because of, it is a need for solving something else. Go ahead.
Well, would that mean then, if it's purely for pain, he would think that in his ideal society, the need for any type of faith system would kind of cease to have a necessity? Or, like, if things were actually good, like if there was just no class.
Exactly. Religion will go away on its own. That's exactly right. He doesn't like Feuerbach. Well, he does. Is Feuerbach mentioned? No, he doesn't mention Feuerbach. I'll talk about Ludwig Feuerbach, who was a philosopher around the same time as Marx. He is influenced by Feuerbach. And Feuerbach is going to critique religion as part of the problem, as maintaining an unjust system. Marx is going to be doing that to an extent. He likes what he has to say about that, but he thinks the ultimate critiques need to be at the, if you want, substructure that gives rise to religion.
It's a symptom of the problem.
That's exactly right. That's the right way that Marx would put it. Feuerbach sees it as the problem, and I'll mention him in a moment. Marx sees it as a symptom. That's in fact a word he'll often... Marx's language is not abundantly clear, so it takes a little bit of figuring out what the hell does he mean here. But ultimately he seems to be telling us that if we can fix the underlying substructure that gives rise to certain ideologies, like religion, and it includes philosophy, it includes art as a kind of developmental ideology, and we see the artistic endeavors of people as it relates to those in power. And oftentimes, what the artists are creating is what is dependent upon those in power. They're creating for those in power, not for themselves. And we'll see that this underlying capitalistic critique, or critique of capitalism, is more fundamental than any critique of religion. But they're going to be intimately connected. Go ahead.
I was wondering if it was ever mentioned or analyzed that if we were taking part in this world, the idealistic society that doesn't need religion, does anyone ever offer similarities between what the religions want the world to look like and how we are moving towards that, and would that not be the same?
Yeah, that's a good...
Yeah, like what would you think of liberation theology? I mean,
he'd be fine with it. What was it? Was that the next quote I have? Where is it? Oh, it's not there. I thought I had it there. I'm going to come back. Don't worry. There it is. Speaking of liberation theology, when I give food to the poor, they call me a saint. Gosh, you can't really see that well, can you? That's awful. Were they all that way? I used red because, obviously, Marx. But it's backfired on me. When I give food to the poor, they call me a saint. When I ask why they are poor, they call me a communist. So I think that quote, this is from Don Elder Kramer, who is a Jesuit Catholic priest. Are they all this bad?
it looks fine from an angle.
Yeah, those particular ones are just more red than this one. So with respect to if religion achieves its goal, then we have what? No need for the religion anymore. Is that where you were going with the question?
I'm just saying, like, what he asked was, if we got to a perfect society, religion would disappear on its own.
For Marx, because we wouldn't need it in the same way that if there weren't bodily injuries that required drugs to alleviate pain, right? If we didn't have that, we won't need pain medication in heaven, the assumption is. So do we need religion in heaven?
Like, the similarity I can't make it because I'm not an expert in either field, but I'm just saying, like, what would the world look like in that perfect society compared to what the world would look like in the world that religion wants? Like, religion would go away, but wouldn't we be, like, practicing the religion is what I'm kind of trying to connect to. You know what I mean?
Religion would go away, but we would still be practicing the religion?
Like the perfect world for people who are religious. Wouldn't that be that perfect world with that would not need the religion? You know?
Yeah, right. That's.
I'm just saying it's the same thing. Like once you're doing that, once you get to that perfect society, is that not the society that religion is pushing for?
This is a difficult question because that's a very broad question, but it also requires getting in depth into certain issues because it does. I mentioned heaven kind of jokingly, but it is relevant to that because if one does achieve a state of pure, true egalitarianism, which is the goal of Marxist communism, moving from capitalism to socialism to communism, where we won't need these other superstructures, like in particular religion as a kind of illusion. He uses the word illusion. We would use the word or the phrase, what's the medical thing? We have pain, no, but it's the sugar pills. They're not real. Good Lord, placebo. Yes, thank you all. That would no longer be needed. Did you want to answer it?
I guess the focus of religion that I didn't point out was not the heaven aspect of it, but the moral aspect of it. Like if you were following the perfect moral aspects of whatever religion, because they some of them overlap. You know, what if it was the perfect ones of those religions? Wouldn't that be like the society that you would be in, where you wouldn't need the opium?
That's
part of the
one of the reasons I mentioned heaven. Why that's such an interesting state, as the goal or the telos of all religious, at least those who believe in a religion. Once you've achieved that, then you've gotten rid. In fact, in Buddhist terms, you've gotten rid of the ladder. The religion is to get you to a particular part. Buddha is to get you as a teacher to a particular place. Once you've gotten there, you get rid of the Buddha. He's no longer needed. But that's not a view that's typical in the West, right? Once you get to heaven, that's the goal. But then what? It seems there's not going to be pain, there's not going to be suffering, there's going to be no need for the salvation, and certainly no moral commandments necessary once you've gotten to that goal, because what are the commandments there for, if not to tell people right and wrong? Why do I need to know the difference between right and wrong? Why would I have choice? These are questions we'll all get to later. I can't deal with them in detail now, but can there be freedom in heaven? If there's no freedom in heaven, which is implied that there wouldn't be, because if there was freedom, that means I could freely choose to do bad in heaven. Are we talking about heaven anymore? But if there is no freedom in heaven, then what is it that we're driving toward? A state in which we, in fact, have less freedom than we do now? It gets into a lot of complexities and difficulties, but your question ultimately is one that Marx would be fond of answering as, yes, if we get to the goal where I want to be, we no longer need religion. The assumption is that religion is a means, to jump to some of the other questions here, of addressing problems in this particular world. You mentioned some of the Marxist critiques of religion, and we'll look at others. Marx and Feuerbach, for example, who is a precursor to Marx, are not new within their ideas about God being created in the image of humanity. You see it with Xenophanes going back many centuries, the 5th century before the Common Era, talking about the poets and the mythical figures and the myth writers themselves, Homer and Hesiod. They've attributed to the gods all sorts of things that are matters of reproach and censure among men: theft, adultery, mutual deception. And then he says elsewhere, if horses and oxen had hands that could draw pictures, their gods would look remarkably like horses and oxen. And you can see this, and maybe if we have time, we'll look at this, the attributes of the divine. If you look at different cultures that are influenced by Judaism, Islam, Christianity, for example, it's not surprising, and this may connect to the religious experiences themselves, based on culture, bless you, or Gesundheit, Salud, depending on the culture, that the perception of the divine is very similar to the people who are giving the artistic rendering of it. Marx talks about this too with art. Art, again, is a kind of ideology that comes out of the positions of power in many cases. And it's not surprising that the God of God, for instance, the medieval Irish, was a very pale-skinned, red-haired individual. Jesus was pale-skinned and red-haired, which is an interesting notion, since Jesus was basically born in the Middle East. He probably had very curly hair, darker skinned. For those in North Africa who are Christians, Jesus was black. For those who see, this is basically borne out anthropologically. You can see the artistic renderings of Jesus, the artistic conceptions of what God is, from the cultures from which they arise. And the similarities to the people is not perhaps surprising. But it might be, from Marxist perspective, that is a potential critique. Why wouldn't God be its own entity, not connected in any way to the particular cultures? Where was another hand? Sorry, yes.
I guess kind of a comment, like when I was reading the Marx part, I guess I kind of forgot that he was just talking about Christianity.
Sort of. Primarily, yeah.
Yeah, it seemed like he was critiquing religion entirely, but now it kind of sounds like he's open to religion, but in that reading it was just critiquing Christianity.
Yeah, and he doesn't have, what is this, a page and a half reading you had from Marx? He doesn't have a lot. This is actually from a critique of Hegel's philosophy of right that he's taught. He's critiquing Hegel. And in that critique, we get his famous quotation, which I'll jump to soon. Still not there yet. But that's true. He does seem to be open to seeing religion in as a positive light as we today might look at drugs, as necessary for some. But what else has happened recently, in the past 5 years, 10 years, with drugs, with the word opiate? You see the worry that Marx had too. One gets addicted to opiates. And I think Marx, he doesn't use the word addiction, as far as I know, with relation to religion. But contemporary Marxist philosophers would, and connect the problems of opioid addiction, and actually find that one can get addicted to religion as well. And it's not meant in a positive way at all. And in fact, some of the Marxist critiques that we see today, when you look at people who are trying to get off of drugs, what is AA, Alcoholics Anonymous? One avoids the addiction of drugs but takes on a different kind of addiction. And again, that could be seen as positive from one perspective. Being addicted to God, what's the big deal? Right? Well, what's Marx's concern with being addicted to what he would call an illusion? Marx is an atheist. He does not believe in God. He follows Feuerbach here. Feuerbach, fiery brook, I think is what that means. He was so influenced by Feuerbach, he at one point said something like, in order to do philosophy properly, one must pass through the fiery brook. Clever, mentioning Feuerbach. Theology is anthropology. Here you get a very naturalizing interpretation of religion. Feuerbach here, a precursor to Daniel Dennett, who has written on philosophy of religion, in particular with the attempt to naturalize it, right? To give a kind of anthropological, scientific interpretation of religion. So we all aspire, Feuerbach says, to love, truth, beauty, happiness, wisdom, purity, strength. And all of this, we aspire to it. But life is difficult. Life is extremely difficult and hard, and it's really hard to get all of these things. Religion enters, Feuerbach says, and these ideals get transformed into God, which basically makes, to summarize Feuerbach, into nothing. And he references the story of Job. Why does humans as seen as nothing, analogous, relevant with respect to the story of Job? What's the story of Job?
At the end of with Job, he's like this really pious guy. He does everything right. He follows the Sabbath and keeps the commandments, and he has all the camels and the ox he can need, and everything starts going wrong, and things burn, and he loses.
Why does everything go wrong?
Because the devil basically talks to God, and it's like, I bet we could have this bet. If I start doing all this bad stuff, he'll stop believing in you.
Yeah.
And that's the bet they do. And everyone around Job wants him to curse God, and he never does. And once he gets to the end, God tells Job, he's like, you need to look at the bigger picture. You're just this really small part in the grand scheme of things. Yes, humans are, my most important creation, but the universe is much grander than you could ever know or understand.
Right.
And then he ends up getting blessed and lives a really long time. He gets everything back.
Right, tenfold. He gets everything back tenfold. We'll talk about that, the problem of evil, because I don't want to skip over that, getting everything back, because he lost all 10 children. They all died in this wager between he and Satan and God. And so that's kind of glossed over. If my children all die, I want them back. I don't want others. I don't want more children that aren't, Anyway, this is what Feuerbach is talking about, right? By the way, good job on retelling that story. Is that sarcastic? The clapping, is that a good thing, the snapping now, or is that a sarcastic?
It's a microaggression now. It's very
Is
loud.
this that's understandable. As long as it's positive. So, clearly we have no means. We are, what is this? That wasn't a misprint there. We humans, we're basically nothing. And we see that in the story of Job. Oh, I even wrote that down. Feuerbach critiques religion as maintaining this kind of system of getting us to be complacent with our position in society. And Marx accepts that and says, yeah, that's what religion does. But that's on top of, that's a superstructure. That's one of the things that's caused by systemic problems that are ultimately material in nature, economic in nature. By material, he is a materialist, but he means specifically the material structures, the conditions that one is born into, the economic systems that one is born into, and how the economic systems in particular can lead to his term that he borrows from Hegel, philosopher before him, alienation. I'll talk about alienation briefly. So I quoted this to you before, actually. The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. He's concerned that the Feuerbachian analysis is too distant. He's concerned that theologians and philosophers, again like Hegel, these very abstract philosophers that are trying to find these basic universal principles that are so universal and so abstract that they've taken away from the lived experience, the actual interventions into human existence. And he accuses theologians of this as well. You'll see a variation of this argument from Friedrich Nietzsche, but not until the end of the semester. And Freud has something to say about this as well. What do I mean by this? Because the problem of suffering, which again we're going to come back to, but the problem of suffering pictured here with this, the photographer Kevin Carter, I think his name is. He won a prize, Nobel Prize, I think, or a prize for his photojournalism. He traveled throughout sub-Saharan Africa and taking photos of these kinds of horrible, giving rise to awareness of the horrible conditions that many, many millions of people were living in. At the age of 28, he had done this for maybe 3 years. Some of you may know this. Taking pictures like this for that long will wear on you. And it did. He committed suicide within 3 years after doing this work, presumably causally connected to this. I don't know if there was a note implying this, but it seems pretty obvious. What Marx and other Marxist critiques of religion in particular are saying is that the theologian is less concerned. You kind of touched on this a moment ago. The theologian is less concerned with this worldly problems. They put on airs as if they were interested and concerned. Marx talks about this, page 184, when he talks about the social principles, the moral principles of Christianity. He goes through a number. It's very brief. It's very brief, so we have to kind of expand upon it. And we look at the height of moral exemplars. Who do you think of? Who's the first person that comes to mind when you think of a moral exemplar? A saint. Who? Oh,
MLK.
Martin Luther King? Gandhi?
Mother Teresa.
Mother Teresa, there it was. That's the one I was going for first. Mother Teresa.
It's hard to say that, though, now in the light of just modern history. It's like people have really zoomed in on those people and even shown that they themselves have had their own secrets.
Oh, sure. That's right. I want to focus on Mother Teresa, though. She did become sainted. Has anyone read Christopher Hitchens' work? Has anyone read Christopher Hitchens' Devil's Advocacy with respect to the canonization of Mother Teresa? We know of Mother Teresa as somebody who does what? Who goes to the poorest of the poor in Calcutta and helps them. Brings God to them. How else does she help them? She's part of a Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is incredible. This is back starting in the 1960s, roughly up to 1980s, 90s. And oftentimes there's conversion. That's important to it. But she's there with the poorest of the poor. And what does she use to help the poor? Here's Christopher Hitchens.
She allows them to suffer longer sometimes.
This is Hitchens' point.
Yeah.
She has the backing and the power of a church that is the most powerful economically in the history of the world, And instead of using the economic power of that church to help actually poor people, suffering people, sick people, she extols suffering as a virtue. And as you note, and this is Hitchens' point, and this is Marx's point in very general terms. Hitchens is narrowing it down. Marx is a theoretical level here, although talking about the problems of being purely theoretical. And instead of using the economic power of the church to help people who are in need, she in fact increases in many cases and elongates the suffering of these individuals. So this is a difficult thing for us to take note of when she's considered a saint, and she's almost always one of the first people we go to. Who's a moral exemplar? Mother Teresa, Saint Teresa. And the Marxist critique is that no, the Christopher Hitchens critique is that no. Indeed, from the religious perspective, suffering is seen as a kind of virtue. If suffering is seen as a kind of virtue, what do we want to do with virtue, speaking of Aristotle? With Aristotle, something is a virtue, it's a good thing, a good-making quality. We want to habituate it and improve it and increase it. This is problematic for people like Marx. And you see those within the church who are within the hierarchy, who are, you mentioned liberation theology, who are within this system and trying to change things. They continually get pushback. You see this within Catholicism. You see this with Catholic nuns, for instance, who are trying to push more focus on the impoverished and trying to help them. But within the hierarchy, this will come to a more explicit discussion when we get to feminist Christian philosophy, question mark, with Patricia Alterman Johnson's reading next week, I guess it is, that there are systemic barriers to living out what many Christians, to speak of Christianity, accept as the teachings of Christianity, the basic principles of Christianity. And we have these ideas, these ideals, as Marx puts them. He gets this from Feuerbach, and he thinks that they are acquirable, if you want. Love, truth, beauty, happiness, wisdom, strength. It isn't God that we require in order to get these things. In fact, it's Marx's point that a truly human society can actually achieve these. And these were going back to your earlier questions. A society that does achieve these, that is not based upon an unholy alliance, if you want, between religion and capital, between religion and wealth creation, between the competitive model of a free market, right? This is, let me just quote here from Marx' Communist Manifesto. He puts it this way: the bourgeoisie, these are the bourgeoisie for Marx are the owning class. They are the capitalists, the owners of capital. They're owners of the modes of production, and they're the ones who accumulate wealth on the backs of workers. So the workers, the proletariats, those are the individuals who sell their labor, sell themselves for the benefit of those who are owners. And so whatever surplus value comes out of the proletariat's work, that surplus value goes to the owners, right? Now Marx is writing at a time that's around the 1840s, 50s, and 60s of the Industrial Revolution. There are many critiques of Marx saying, wait a minute, you're equating the runaway problems of industrialization with capitalism as such. That's a false equivalence between the two. We'll see. Here's what he says: the bourgeoisie has left no other nexus between man and man than naked self-interest, than callous cash payment. It has drowned the most heavenly ecstasies of religious fervor, of chivalrous enthusiasm, of Philistine sentimentalism in the icy water of egotistical calculation. He's quite a writer. You might think maybe he could have been clearer.
What's the Philistine?
A Philistine is, what's the, not like a caveman, not like a like a.
They're like ignorant to
No.
like finer culture.
Yes. I was going to say troglodyte. Then I was going to explain one term with a less known term, which I shouldn't have done. But yes, someone who's not fond of or doesn't care about. And indeed, Marx himself points out, why would I how does anyone have time to be concerned about the arts, about philosophy, when all I'm doing is laboring for other people's surplus value? I'm exhausted when I come home. All I want is rest. And so the little wage that I earn, I want to spend on not thinking about my job. And that critique is not gone, I think. It's not coincidental, Marx would say, that so many people desire to retire early, to make it rich quick, to get the hell out of the game, to get out of, as Camus says, this constant struggle of pushing the boulder up the hill to have it fall right back down. Because for so many people, work is shit. And the goal is to get to the weekend. And we love our weekends, so we can spend our excess money to go back to the owners, who then we will go work for again the 5-day week. This is the Marxist critique, right? And so who has time to worry about arts and culture and the high? It's easy to be a Philistine when we have been alienated from our work. The things that we make, we can make them very cheaply now, which is the ideal of capitalism, Marx says. The ideal is to sell the product, to use labor as cheaply as possible so that we can sell the product for the greatest surplus. That's why American slavery was so important economically to our country. Were there not the system of slavery in the United States, you do not have this country. It is, in a literal economic sense, built upon free, not cheap, but free forced labor. So this is something that can't be ignored. And so you're alienated from your labor, to say nothing of slave labor, to be alienated from your labor, from yourself, from your families. When you make a product, in the past, you could make a shoe. A cobbler would make a shoe, like the whole thing. The whole shoe would be done by one dude, maybe two, and there would be some pride in that work. One that is their product, and they would make something off, or they would trade, and there wouldn't be any alienation, separation from that product. With the division of labor, which we think that's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing to have a division of labor where I work on making the shoelace. You work on making the holes where the shoelaces go through. You work on the plastic thing on the end of the shoelaces. Sorry, that's your job. And that's it. That's all you do. But we together can make shoes really fast. But then if I'm told, all right, we need you to do something, you need to make the whole shoe yourself. Like, I only do the little cap thing. I don't know how to... What is it? Aglet? How the hell do you know that? What's that? Oh, Phineas and Ferb?
Yeah, like that show.
I know that show.
Dedicated to Aglet.
That's funny. Aglet? It's really called that? It's got to be called something. Somebody invented it.
Aglet. AGLE. There you go.
So I did like Phineas and Ferb. My kids have gone on to other shows now. I was trying to think of what other shows they're watching now. How weird. What are they watching now? Breaking Bad, maybe? I can't remember. Anyway, I'm giving them bread and circuses so that they can watch these movies and these shows and not worry about the horrors of their lives. So that's the critique. That's what it is. That's what we develop these things. And then we sell the product. It's not part of us. We're alienated from other people. We're alienated from nature, Marx says as well. Capitalism sees trees not as nature but as paper. As literally paper money, paper that we can make stuff of, right? Water is seen as a source. You look at Nestle. What has Nestle done with the Great Lakes? They've taken the water of the Great Lakes, bottled it, and now sold it. That's an incredible thing to do. It's water. Well, how do you? People used to joke about this years ago. Soon they're going to charge money for water. What's next? Air? Yes, you can buy air. That's, I don't want to look it up now, but on your own time you can buy air. Anything is for sale. Truly anything is for sale. Go online. I wouldn't actually do this, but you could find pretty much anything for sale. There's a price for anything. I don't have time to go through this dialectic process, and it's not necessary for our purposes here. Although that's... this dialectic process of taking what Hegel says, his thesis, the antithesis is Feuer's response to it. It's the material conditions that determine history. Doesn't necessarily see it as development. But then Marx says Hegel's correct, Feuerbach's correct. There is history progresses, but it's through material conditions, and it's through material conditions that benefit those with power. And those with power, those with money, make the rules, make the laws for and by themselves at the expense of those without. And here we get finally his famous quote in full: religious distress is at the same time the expression of real distress. Religion is an illusion. He agrees with Freud. He would agree with Freud on this. It is, again, a placebo. It's not a real thing. But it is a placebo for a real distress for Marx. He doesn't go into arguments why religion is an illusion. Right? He, like Nietzsche and Freud too, really aren't going to give us philosophical arguments. We'll have to get to that later from a non-theist or atheist perspective. He's starting the presupposition that it is an illusion, giving it a kind of anthropological, economic account. So, religious distress is at the same time the expression of real distress and the protest against real distress. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, just as it is the spirit of a spiritless situation. It is, again, the opium of the people. And you see how he discusses this again, page 184, where he looks primarily at the Christian value system as a means of either a crutch for those who have little, to not worry about it. And you see, in fact, the quote from scriptures quite often, the poor will always be among us, as if it's a natural fact. If it's there's nothing that can be done about it. But have no fear, and here we jump into the illusion that Freud has. We'll discuss the suffering that you're going through now. It is a virtue. You will be rewarded in heaven. The meek shall inherit the earth, and so on. All of those slogans, according to Marx, according to Freud, are mere illusions to keep the poor in check. And Marx was aware of this. Marx was aware of, again, the superstructure, which is you've got art, you've got philosophy, you've got religion. All of that's coming about because of the material conditions. The philosophy that you have, the art that you have at any given time period is a result of the underlying economic material structural system in place. The workers of the world should unite, but those with power have kept them from doing so. If only those from different races and different religions could see that they are on the same team, so to speak, the proletariat team, the working team, their numbers would be enormous. And the way that capitalism works, according to Marx, is that the few get richer and fewer. And the gap between the haves and the have-nots increases, and the numbers of those with less and less becomes bigger, but they are divided. They're divided by wedges that those in power facilitate and cultivate, such that these people who are economically in the same position, but are on different teams because one is of this religion, that's of that religion. One's black, one's white, one's Hispanic, one's white, and so forth. Dividing it up that way, regardless of one's economic system or position, keeps them from coming together and uniting, Marx says. This is a continued Marxist critique of the inequalities that we see today, in fact. Go ahead, sorry.
I was going to ask, does he believe religion is like kind of the cause for capitalism and like the inequality of capitalism?
I don't believe so. Again, he's not terribly clear here. He's more focused on the superstructure, the substructure that's giving rise to these different ideologies. And the language he uses, and it goes back to, there's a wonderful book out by Jason Stanley called How Propaganda Works. I think the term propaganda would be appealing to Marx. It's a term that wasn't around, as far as I know, around Marx's time. But the term propaganda, the use of religion and religious language to stifle dissent from those without power and to maintain an unjust system.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to ask.
I think it's used to maintain an unjust system, not the cause. I don't see in Marx arguments that religion causes these disparities. we'll see more about perhaps that with respect to gender issues. There, the different argument could be made that religion plays a role in actually creating disparities and in not just sustaining them. Go ahead.
Just in relation to that, I feel like I don't get a sense that he's saying capitalism comes from religion, but he'll say like criticism of religion is the premise of all criticism. That kind of makes it sound like it is, but
Wait, so, you're talking about what he says on page 183?
yeah, the very, very first sentence.
Oh, for Germany, the criticism of religion is in the main complete, and criticism of religion is the premise of all criticism.
Are you saying that's implied?
You know, that's funny. That's the first line.
Yeah. But
We should know what that means.
But I feel like the sense of the rest of it goes along with what you're saying.
Yeah, for Germany, the criticism of religion. Now, for Germany, it's interesting he's calling that out. Again, I think he's referencing Hegel and he's referencing Feuerbach in particular. Feuerbach primarily, but this is a critique about Hegel, and so this is where his most vehement attacks on religion come from. I think he's talking more about the criticism of religion is in the main complete. And criticism of religion is the premise of all criticism. Now that I look back over that, I'm going to have to tell you I don't know what the hell that means. Forgive me. Forgive me for saying hell. And also for not knowing what that means. I mean, I can interpret that in a couple of ways. I think it means that the critiques of religion that Feuerbach has offered, I mean, they are complete, but fine. That doesn't get at. Let's imagine we critique religion. And let's imagine we get rid of religion altogether. That's not going to solve our problems. Freud might disagree. Here, I think Freud might disagree. Religion causes a lot of problems in a way that Marx, I think, doesn't. So that would be my interpretation. I have to think more about that, actually. I have to think more about that. I think that may be specific to a historical. We may need more information historically about the context in which Marx is writing that.
You're saying that all criticism has to do with criticism?
I don't think that's accurate. I mean, if that's what he's saying, that just seems outright false. So he must be implying something else. I'll have to come back to that. I don't like saying I don't know. But I'm going to stick with that as my answer. Even though I said a bunch of other things after I said I don't know. So this is what people do. Why do we do that? All right, so there's Das Kapital, the Communist Bible that it's called. It's sometimes called that. I forgot who put it this way, but it's probably called that because it's got more adherents to it than who have actually read it. It's enormous. It's 3 volumes. It's over 1,000 pages. And it's as dense as the reading you just had, a page and a half. Imagine reading 1,000 pages like that.
Each volume is about 1,000.
Oh, no, I think total it's about 1,000.
Total.
Oh, it's very long. It's too long. What I was talking about earlier with the art being kind of superstructure, kind of ideology, philosophy too, and religion, and we start to see this rise against, he called it fantastical romanticism, but you also see the fantasy, unrealistic interpretations of the world, and also you see the religious paintings as well that are almost romantic in nature, that are mythological, which maybe not surprising to us. But around the time and influenced by Marx, you find artists like Gustave Courbet looking at what was it? The art of the art of the ugly is kind of how it was referred to. It's a realism that says this is what life is actually like. And you get the perspective now of the impoverished. Art from the perspective of and about the poor. It's a kind of equivalent to the works of the historian Howard Zinn with his A People's History, where he tells history from the side of the perspective of the losers, as he puts it, right? Of history, those who lost wars, those who were on the oppressive end, whether they were minorities within the United States or women within the United States. This is a pictorial representation of that. You see a variation of it too with Kathy Kollwitz, The March of the Weavers, the drive toward fighting against unjust economic systems. If you read Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, that's a heavily influenced Marxist critique of industry that takes advantage of people, including small children, right? Things changed over time. Again, largely because of workers uniting and unionizing, coming out of a kind of Marxist critique. You get an 8-hour day, you get the weekends off, you get laws against children engaging in labor, all sorts of laws, which I don't think would have come out, at least Marx critique claims, would not have come out were it not for external critiques from against capitalism. All right, so let me wrap up here. Religion's not the problem. This is what we were talking about before. So a critique of religion, what Feuerbach was up to, is not going to be sufficient. The goal is to fix the underlying social political issues, and the symptom of religion will go away. That's a bold claim, and it's a claim that Harvey Cox made in a variant of this back in 1960, arguing that the rise of success in capitalism, where in fact the market becomes God, interestingly, the markets will decide. They're divine in a sense. We'll not need religion anymore and will become a secular age. That has not, in fact, come to fruition. And finally, the abolition of religion as the illusory happiness of the people is the demand for their real happiness. To call on them to give up their illusions about their conditions, to call on them to give up a condition that requires illusions. The criticism of religion is therefore, in embryo, the criticism of that veil of tears, that suffering, of which religion is the halo. We kind of talked about that already. How is it that we can deal with this, the horrors and tortures of this world? Well, religion offers a kind of opiate for it. It offers a salve, even if, as Marx admits, for his perspective, it is purely a placebo effect. And any positive you want to take from that might be, hey, placebo effects work. So there may be something to that. That gets us into some interesting political, social, and epistemic questions as well. Is it acceptable to teach lies only insofar as they work? From the perspective of Marx, that's what's happening. From the perspective of Freud, that's what's happening as well. So a quick jump to Freud, and then we'll see where we are. Freud, I should tell you, you're familiar with Sigmund Freud. I'm certain of this. You've taken classes in psychology. Somebody's probably taking psychology right now. Nobody is. Who is? You're taking psychology right now? Have you gotten to Freud yet?
Talked about him, yeah.
You must talk about Freud and psychology. Very much influenced by Darwin and Hobbes politically. So Darwin, with respect to evolutionary theory, and Hobbes with respect to the use of power, the importance of power in all things social and political. And if you know of Hobbes, when he talks about the state of nature, where life is, what was the phrase? Short, nasty, brutish. And I'm missing something. It ends with short. No, that was Schopenhauer. Life is a mistake. Hobbes doesn't say it quite that much. But he says, in a state of nature, outside of a social contract, right, it's everyone for themselves. And so in a state of nature, life is brutal, it's nasty, it's difficult, and it's also short. I think we talked about that before, the Woody Allen film, or the Woody Allen quote, saying life is like a lousy restaurant. The food is so terrible, and you get so small portions. This doesn't seem to fit. So when you combine the Hobbesian notion that people come together for a reason, we come together, we sign formally or informally contracts to work together because being separate, while we have a lot of freedom, is not as good as being together in a community, in a society. Even though when we come together in a society, we give up a lot of freedoms. And he's going to see this as a kind of parallel. We give up a lot of freedoms when we join a particular religion. But the psychological reason for doing this is that we want to give these freedoms up because we feel better, right? In the same way that we feel better in a state rather than a state of nature. In a state of nature, it's everyone against everyone. I'm free to do whatever the hell I want, but I'm also scared to death. What if I'm a big, strong dude? Doesn't matter. There's always going to be a lot of other people who could be your enemies, and the group can take down the individual, right? If you're a smart person, yeah, you can still be taken out by a lot of dumb people or something like that. The state of nature is not desirable, even though there's a great deal of freedom. Freud's ultimate conclusions Here he is. This is the picture that he's always. The deal is. This is a joke for. Oh, where's the joke? Did I skip it? Damn it! Oh, there it is. Just a cigar. Anyway, that's a joke for those in the psychology class. It's not a very funny one. So, what was I going to talk about here? Religion is produced and sustained. Here's a different view. It isn't an opium. It isn't an opiate. Or it isn't just that. It's created out of a kind of neurotic desire, an unhealthy desire that all of us have to some extent that goes back to our childhood. We've retained that with us. It's extremely low estimation of religion. We're all basically still like children, and religion provides us with a kind of means of protection. It's illusory too. Actually, he doesn't use the word illusion. Oh, he does, but he means basically the same thing that we mean by delusion, which is different. So religion is produced and sustained out of the infantile need for our Father's protection. The world is difficult, as we saw Feuerbach pointing that out as well. It's horrible, it's difficult. We need help, we need a father figure, and God provides us with that ultimate father figure. Right? And when we're kids, I don't know if you remember this, but I remember being young enough to feel like my parents were always watching. Even when I was alone, I felt that they know what's going on. And so I'd have to be very cautious. Do you see what I mean? And I even felt this. This is weird that I remember this. You know, during Christmas time, did you ever change your behavior around December to be really good?
Yeah, he's making his list.
I
Checked
know.
it twice.
I know. But do you remember doing this?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. I thought I'd be the only one, because I was pretty old before I discovered that Santa, in fact, did not exist. But I remember changing my behavior. Notice what's going on here. It's reminiscent of Michel Foucault. If you've heard of Foucault, his discussion on punishment, on mental illness, on the justice and imprisonment systems. The Panopticon is something he uses, borrowing from the philosopher Jeremy Bentham. The Panopticon is a prison setup where the building is all glass and the prisoners are all visible from just one area. The prisoners can't see that area, but the prison guards can see wherever they want. But the prison guards don't have to be there all the time, because the prison guards, all they need to keep the prisoners in check is for the prisoners to think that they could be being watched at this moment. And so the prison guards can do whatever they want. Sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not. Right? All they need to do is instill the fear that they are being watched. And this is the fear that children have, and that keeps them in line, as Freud will put it. That they're being watched at all times. And therefore you can police the populace without having to actually be looking over them. If you can then take that father figure and make it divine, a God that sees all, that is ubiquitous, that means everywhere, that is omniscient, that means knows everything. Knows everything. Everything that you do, everything that you think. This is as Freud would put it, the most tyrannical and authoritarian conception of a father figure that one can imagine. Now, what does this lead to? Freud, as I said, doesn't have a very popular view, a very positive view. He says, we attempt to procure a certainty of happiness and protection against suffering through, and here's the term he uses, delusional remolding of reality. The religions of mankind must be classed among the mass delusions of this kind. No one who shares a delusion ever recognizes it as such. So he's not just saying, religious folk typically make mistakes epistemically with respect to knowledge. Right, let me focus again, because this is not in the section you had. The selection you had was actually quite short. The book that this comes from, The Future of Illusion, is itself very short, although the font is absurd. That's very small. He says, when I say that these things are illusions, I must define the meaning of the word. An illusion is not the same thing as an error, nor is it necessarily an error, although he does think it is. He says Aristotle's belief that vermin are developed out of dung, a belief to which ignorant people still cling, was an error. So was the belief of a former generations of doctors having a particular disease as a result of the sexual excess. It would be incorrect to call these errors illusions. On the other hand, it was an illusion of Columbus's that he had discovered a new sea route to the Indies. The part played by his wish in this error was very clear. This is the key. One may describe an illusion, the assertion made by certain nationalists that the Indo-Germanic race is the only one capable of civilization. This Freud's aware of what's going on in Nazi Germany at the time. Or the belief, which was only destroyed by psychoanalysis, that children are creatures without sexuality. What is characteristic of illusions is that they are derived from human wishes. In this respect, they come near to psychiatric delusions. But they differ from them, too. Apart from the more complicated structure of delusions, in the case of delusions, we emphasize as essential their being in contradiction with reality. Illusions need not necessarily be false, that is to say, unrealizable or in contradiction to reality. However, Freud, looking down at everyone there, tells us the illusions, the neuroses that develop from religious mindset goes well beyond simply saying that it's a crutch. It is something that is a placebo. For Freud, it's far worse, as he puts it here. The whole thing, religion, is so patently infantile, so incongruous with reality, that to one whose attitude to humanity is friendly, it is painful to think that the great majority of mortals will never be able to arise above this view of life. We are like children if we maintain our system of thought with respect to religion. Infantile, in fact. And creating, and here he wavers, it seems to me, back between this conception of illusion, which again doesn't mean, oh, I got it wrong, it could still be illusory. But delusion, which seems to be what he's talking about here, it is incongruous with reality. And it is reasons resistant. I'll say more about that with propaganda because both Marx and Freud, I think, would use the word propaganda, appeal to that with respect to the way that religion is propagated from their perspective. I saw a question.
With Freud, does he encourage us to pay him and sit on and lay on the sofa and talk? What's the alternative to these wishes that we have? Does he want us to buy into his school of psychoanalysis instead of religion? Or
Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it. Because he does find science. At one point, he says science is one of the best ways of achieving knowledge about the world. In fact, doesn't he answer? The very last line of the whole text is, let me get to the first part of it there. Oh, that's too long. Damn it. This is the last line of the text from The Future of Illusion. No, our science is no illusion, but an illusion it would be to suppose that what science cannot give us, we can get elsewhere. That almost sounds like scientism, right? Science can't solve the problem of meaning. Well, that means we can get it from religion. Well, no, not necessarily. It may be that we never get an answer to that at all. And you're right, he does find that to be more desirable. You're not going to solve your neurotic problems, your individual psychical issues by seeking religion. That actually facilitates them. That is a cause of them. Whereas psychoanalysis is a means of unearthing them, bringing them to the level of consciousness. Because a lot of these beliefs, religious beliefs, are systematic or systemic. They're cultural, and they're about our identity. And that's why it's so hard for us to hear a Marxist Freudian critique.
they're inheritable as well, right? There's some speaker we read that said you can inherit an inclination to be more religious.
Oh, well, I don't know that
Who
Bloom
said that?
implied that. Did Bloom say that? Inheritable in the sense that it's part of our culture and we grow up in it. And if I'm in a part of a family that doesn't question the faith but simply gives information to the children and only positive information of that particular faith, ignoring other faiths, in that sense, yeah, it's a cultural inheritance. Biological, maybe as well. Bloom does talk about that as there being a kind of pre-wiring to see intentionality, which is not quite the same thing as to be religious. Ramachandran, who we saw in the video, they're just meeting each other again. It's probably since yesterday. Oh my God, we're good friends. That's great. Except they threw me off. What the hell was I saying? It was going to be a great point too.
So Bloom and the inheritance and the culture.
Then Ramachandran and the God spot. Remember in the video he said, the popular press accused me of saying there's a God spot, a G spot. That was his joke. He was making a joke. I don't know. They caught that. No, there isn't a specific part in the brain that gives rise to religious beliefs. So it's not, I think, biologically inherited in that sense or genetically inherited. Culturally, yes. Mimetically, as opposed to genetically. The term meme arose out of, I believe, Dawkins' book on the selfish gene. There's genetic inheritance that you get sort of biologically, and you're just born with it. But then there's mimetic inheritance. A cultural meme spreads incredibly quickly. And that's Daniel Dennett's conception of religion as a kind of mimetic contagion. Sometimes it benefits us, other times, at least when we look at Freud in particular, it is a problem. It is an infantile illusion that needs to be gotten rid of, just as our illusions about Santa have gotten rid of in our adulthood. We should, to paraphrase St. Paul, we should do away with childish things, is what Freud would say. Not the same point St. Paul was making, obviously. So, this is an extraordinarily negative view of religion as such. We'll see an equally negative view of this at the end of the semester in response with Friedrich Nietzsche. There's a few more things I want to say with respect to this, and it had to do with these beliefs. Beliefs, Freud is mostly interested in the individual, dealing with the beliefs that I as a person hold, whether they're stereotypes, whether they're illusions, delusions, from an individual psychical perspective, my perspective. But what is in the background of a Freudian and Marxist critique, Marx more so, is the culture into which we are born and where these systems of beliefs come from and why it's so difficult, and here you get into propaganda. Propaganda is presenting ideas in a way that gets at our emotional centers. They convince us not through argument and reason. In fact, it works on our most cherished beliefs, oftentimes on our theological beliefs, our moral beliefs, and of course our political beliefs. This was written in 2015. I suspect Jason Stanley will have a new version of this very soon with an update. What does he mean by, he's interested in beliefs that are systemic, that are not simply individualistic, because there are all sorts of beliefs that I have, he points out, that are not resistant to evidence, to facts, to argument. He quotes Hume, he quotes Marx, both of whom say that religious beliefs are those kinds of beliefs that are resistant to evidence. They're irrational in that sense. And we've already looked at responses to that kind of viewpoint. But the concern that Stanley has with respect to propaganda is those cultural beliefs that are based on identity, whether it's religious identity, political identity, how it is that they spread, and how it is that they are seemingly immune to counter evidence. Here's evidence of, let's say, a deep fake. Do you know what a deep fake is? What's a deep fake? A video. Online that goes viral. Yeah?
It's like a AI-driven way of manipulating things.
Like you could get Obama to say he's like for the wall, basically. Now.
Yes, they did that. They got Obama to say, what did he say? Donald J. Trump is a dipshit. Something like that. I can't remember. It sounded just like it because it was Obama's words. And it was his face. It was digitally manipulated and put together. It's a fake. It didn't happen. But for those who don't like Obama and who like the current President Trump, will say, yeah, that really happened. That just fortifies what we already believe. and vice versa. Both sides are going to use deepfakes. They already have. They already have, and it's going to get worse. This election year, I hate to say this, but I'll bet it'll be the worst ever. If you see a commercial that's a political ad, turn it off. Don't waste your time with it. You will learn nothing by political ads. You will learn almost nothing. I'm exaggerating a little bit. You will learn very little about what's going on. They are jabs. They're oftentimes relying upon propaganda and other tools to try to further divide. In most cases. I don't want to say in all cases, that's too extreme. But we want to know, what is it about in this case, political holding on to positions, even in the face of counter evidence? I am told, I've given this example before, I used to think that all squirrels were brown. That's what I believed. And then I went to Illinois and I said, oh my gosh, there's a non-brown squirrel. Immediately. And since, this was years ago, I've had no trouble believing that all squirrels, in fact, are different colored. I didn't know that. Now I do, and it was so easy for me to change. But political beliefs, if I'm given evidence, counter evidence that goes against my political biases, oftentimes I ignore that. How does this happen? Why does this happen? And a lot of it, Stanley talks about, has to do with the sense of identity, that changing that belief, a change in that belief, a weakness in that belief is seen as a weakness in my identity. And we maintain beliefs, even in the face of counter evidence, Stanley says, borrowing from David Hume, borrowing from Karl Marx again, because I'm part of a community. And I don't want to leave that community. I don't want to be kicked out of that community. I don't want my reason to tell me I can no longer belong. I no longer do belong. And so I will ignore, I will dismiss, I will put up all kinds of rationalizing barriers so that I don't have to question those cherished or core beliefs. In this case, we're talking about religious beliefs. In a negative sense, from the Marxist critique and the Freudian critique. Think of it in terms of this. Marxist critique is more systemic, where the beliefs come from and how we're part of groups. Freud's is more individualistic, like where do these particular neuroses come from? And I think you put the two together and you get a conception of what Stanley's talking about with respect to propaganda in general. And as he says, there was a quote I wanted to give, but I'm afraid it's too long now, because I'm not going to get to Hick, am I? It is too long. I'll summarize it. When we're confronted with evidence that goes against our core beliefs, when it goes against what we take or cherished beliefs, what we take to be our identity, think of Plato's cave. What happens when that prisoner comes back? You've all heard of the story of the allegory of the cave, yes? In the allegory of the cave, we have Plato tell us these prisoners are trapped to the cave wall. They're looking at nothing but shadows. The shadows are cast by puppets, which is from a light that's basically just a fire. Outside the cave is the actual light of the sun. These prisoners have never seen that. One escapes and realizes, oh my gosh, we've been stuck in the back of the cave all this time. That's not reality. We've been misled. We're wrong. The escaped prisoner comes back in to try to free his fellow prisoners, and what happens to the escaped prisoner?
They kill him?
They threaten to kill him. Why? I just came back to tell you you're in chains. To borrow from Marx, all you have to lose is your chains.
Yeah.
So that's
good.
Thank you for that connection there. But they do. First they mock him because he can't see the shadows anymore because he's seen the bright light of the sun. But then they threaten to kill him. Why? Plato doesn't tell us in the language of propaganda, but he gives the seeds for this idea. Even when we're confronted with evidence against our cherished views, our core beliefs, our beliefs that identify us, that we feel comfortable with, if we're confronted with counter evidence that may convince us, in fact, it has to be somewhat convincing for violence to be a response, right? Because if somebody comes in and says, hey, you're just living in the Matrix, you're going to laugh at that person. But if they say, you're living in the Matrix, here's a pill, swallow it, and you'll see what I'm talking about, and then you realize, holy shit, there's something to this. You don't want it to be true. We have a history of people responding in violence. In fact, Marx would point out what happened to Galileo, what happened to Giordano Bruno, what happened to others who argued that, you know what, the earth...
JFK.
Different category, perhaps. Hold off on that. They went against, in this case, the hierarchy of the church, and they were condemned, either put to death or at least forced to retract their statements publicly about the earth and the claims about it that go against the church. There's a question. You sure? Because I'm done. So, there's more, but I can't get into the quotations. They're too long to get the sense of it. So that's a lot. And all of that is difficult to accept, especially if we're coming at this material from a religious background. What is our response to this? We actually looked at some of the responses. We looked at the Jamesian practical response, pragmatic response. We've looked at William Alston's experiential basis, the groundlessness of belief from Norman Malcolm. All of those accounts could be seen as responses to some of these naturalistic critiques of religion. How well they do, that's, of course, a matter for you to think about and decide for yourself. The transition into the next period, the next discussion, is not so smooth, although you can find some connections to it, because we looked at religious experience, we looked at explanations for why people have different religious experiences that they do. The next question is, why are there so many different kinds of religion? On a Freudian, Marxist, anthropological account, purely natural account, we can easily explain that. In the same way that we can easily explain why native languages develop over time in different areas geographically. That's easily explained. But it's problematic for the theist that there are so many religions. It's problematic for the exclusivist. What's an exclusivist? With respect to religion, haven't heard from somebody yet. Go ahead.
You're monotheistic, like your God is the only God.
Right. There's only one God, and it's the God I have to worship. Which means, if you recall from our discussion of atheism, I'm an atheist with respect to all of the gods. None of the other gods exist. Right? Daniel Dennett puts it this way. For the exclusivist, for the monotheist, it ought to occur to them, why is it? How is it that there could be so many other faiths that get it so wrong? And if I'm a monotheist, I'm always in the minority. Dennett puts it this way. There's always going to be more people who don't believe the way that I believe. There are more non-Christians than there are Christians. There are more non-Muslims than there are Muslims. Do you see what I mean? Now, that's not simply a numbers game. It's not. The argument isn't, aha, there are more people who don't believe the way that you believe, therefore you're wrong. That's, of course, a logical fallacy known as what? Appeal to popularity. We wouldn't say, well, this religion's got to be right, because look at how many people believe it. This is an argument that was used, actually, among Christians for some time. It can't be merely coincidental that there are so many Christians. Therefore, there must be some truth to it. After all, there are more Christians than there are any other faith. Well, that's not true anymore, I don't think. I think the numbers are very close. I think Muslims...
it's projected to be very similar to
Muslims will overtake. And if we were going to say that it's simply a matter of numbers, then, well, Islam will be the true faith based on numbers. Right? So, what am I getting at? The arguments... So we can't really get much into this. What do we have? 5 minutes. I can give you the title. Okay. Religion, religious pluralism, and ultimate reality. If I am a theist, I need to come to terms not just with religious experiences that are so vastly different than any religious experience I might have had, assuming I've had one, but why it is that there are so many different religious perspectives. And the key question here is, so many different faiths with so many seeming, if not unquestionably, contradictory claims. That's the key. Can I be a pluralist? Can I be open? Can I be tolerant? Can I be, all those words. And maintain only my one religion? Or is there the worry of arrogance, of even an oppressive attitude against those who don't believe as I believe? This is one of the justifications for pluralism. Pluralism, to put it in definitional terms, simply many equally good ways to relate to God. and the major world religions, and we'll see Hick, he focuses on the major world religions. He doesn't have much positive to say about what he'll call the primal religions, which has a negative connotation to it, primitive, not developed, and so on. That's going to be a separate issue that we'll have to
Is
speak
major
to.
necessarily Abrahamic religions or?
Yes. Most of the faiths that developed after what he'll call the axial age. The axial age is a phrase that was used by the philosopher Karl Jaspers, having to do around, and it varies, 200 BCE up until, actually I have that, don't I have that? The dates, there's Hick. There it is. All the way back to the 6th century BC. So starting with Zoroaster, the authors of the Upanishads, that's in Hinduism, Homer, Confucius, Lao Tzu, Buddha, Mahavira of Jainism, Parmenides, Heraclitus, Socrates, Plato, Archimedes, Elijah, or Eli, Jeremiah, the prophets, and so forth. He's mostly talking about those major faiths. I don't think he would be fond of Scientology, and even perhaps the Church of Latter-day Saints, Mormons. He would probably consider those. I don't know that he'd use the word cult, but maybe he would. Maybe he would. So there are many equally good ways to relate to God, and the major world religions are examples, but you're right to ask that question. What do you mean by that? He does, maybe not in the section that you have, he does talk about that. And it's not a positive discussion, I think. I think he's dismissive of anything but Islam, Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, the main religions that you look at, like 8 of them, basically, and there are more than 8 religions in the world, by the way, in a world religions textbook. And then, of course, exclusivism is a particular religion's the only way to get in a proper relationship with God, or the only way to salvation. Just for example, you may be familiar with from John 14:6, Jesus declares that I am the truth, the way, the light. No one comes to the Father but through me. That's fairly exclusive. It's fairly clear. It's not a matter of, well, Buddhists can make it too. No. This is what matters. Notice this reading will connect very well with the multiple religious orientation of Janine Diller, which is one of the longer readings we've had. We will cover both of these in full, and we will have caught up by the 13th. That's next class on Thursday. And anything we don't cover from Diller on the 13th, we will finish up on the 18th when we get into feminist Christian philosophy, on that day. All right. We have a minute. No, we're out of time. So if you have questions, you can stick around. Otherwise, enjoy your day. It's a beautiful day. Oh, I forgot your reflection discussions. Son of...
It's a good class, it's fine.
Next time.
Yeah.
What about next?
You wrote reflections on Hick for today, and then I was supposed to have you discuss it in groups. I forgot. I'll have to figure out what to do about that.
Thank you very much.
Indeed, take care, y'all.
Hi, excuse me.
Yes.
I have a question about this mark. Why it's shown missing?
I don't know. Well, I don't have that. If it's a discussion, it means you didn't.
I think I didn't register yet.
Is it there though? Did I give? Let me put some stuff away. I forgot to mention that too. Son of, I'm behind. Let me see.